we have guests here, and obviously we have some guests who are, joining us remotely on Zoom. So what I've told people here is that we're going to try and alternate between the Zoom meeting and the live memorial here. So we have a few speakers to start, and then hopefully we can switch to some of you in a few minutes. If you'd like to say anything, certainly you're welcome to stay and just be with us to remember George. So we'll check back with you, but we're going to start with a couple of speakers here. We're trying to get our speaker to be loud enough so we can hear you. Can one of you speak?
Good morning.
Okay, good enough. We can hear you loud and clear here. So I think Jimmy would like to start, or my sister Laura would like to start.
You can just pass my phone.
And Laura, I'm going to give you Ricky's phone so that they can see you.
We also have this phone.
Wait, how's this work? Oh, perfect.
George, since you've been gone, my mind has been flooded with thoughts and memories of you. These are only a few. You had a great appetite for life, knowledge, adventure, travel, and music. When we were growing up in the Bronx at our home on Overing Street, you had a great appetite for everything on the dinner table. When we didn't want what was on our plate, you happily took care of it. We called you the garbage can. I had the pleasure of sharing a space with you. Not. Our space in the attic was divided by a bookshelf and a partition, so it was definitely not soundproof. When you came home from college on break, you would blast your music till the wee hours. I loved your 60s music, and I thought it was cool that you went to Woodstock, but it was hard for me to get enough sleep for elementary school. I think I was sleep deprived the day I got a B on my test, and my teacher said that I had to stay after school. I didn't understand. It was a decent grade, but the teacher said I could have done better because I was in anger. I couldn't believe it. Look what you started. Actually, George, you gave us a very high standard to live up to and a very respectable reputation in St. Raymond's that we all had to uphold. It was a lot to live up to, as you were a genius. You could always answer any question from anybody. I remember when you were on the Jeopardy show, we were all so proud of you. Our brother was on TV, and you won a set of Encyclopedia Britannica that we all used to help complete our homework assignments. Your love of travel and adventure took you to the far ends of the earth, even Papua New Guinea. You remembered to bring us souvenirs, and we loved watching the slideshows of your trips when you returned. You took most of us on tours of your adopted country, Panama. You were the best tour guide and host ever. I remember my most recent trip with the kids. Every day after breakfast, you would say, "Listo?" We replied, "Sí, listo." We were always ready, as we knew that a fun and interesting adventure awaited. On the agenda were the places that you worked, the Bio Museo and the Discovery Center, where you left your mark for generations to come. You were known to the locals, your Smithsonian colleagues, and the Kuna, and we teasingly called you a rock star. When we were out on an excursion, inevitably someone would realize who you were, and they would ask you to sign your popular Panamanian bird guide or speak on a tour at the museum. We visited the San Blas Islands in Cunayala, the beautiful pristine beaches that you loved so much, because when you were there, you had no choice but to relax. You were a wonderful grandson, nephew, son, brother, brother-in-law, uncle, great uncle, cousin, colleague, and friend. You were a mentor and role model to our nieces and nephews, some of whom joined you on the annual Christmas bird count at Pelham Bay Park for the Audubon Society. It was a great experience for them. I know you were a big influence on our Erin, who is now working in the same field. You also had to fill in as a surrogate father on occasion. You had to stand up for me on my wedding day due to Dad's illness. You did not want to wear a suit, but you did. You were so proud to walk me down the aisle. You loved participating in family events, and we were often dance partners. You were very enthusiastic when you twirled me, and sometimes I wound up on the other side of the room. You loved Mom very much, and you called her regularly. Sometimes you two sounded like an old married couple when you were together. You came up for Thanksgiving and Christmas every year, except on 2 occasions in the 30-plus years that you lived in Panama. You always prepared the shrimp cocktail and the mashed potatoes for Thanksgiving dinner, and you always bought us delicious Panamanian coffee for Christmas. Occasionally, you would come up for ball games, and although you were a Yankees fan, you would come up for Mets games as well. It didn't matter as long as you could be with your family. You had a great interest in our family history, which you researched, recorded for us to enjoy and to pass down. The last time we were in Panama with you, we got word from the Bronx that our dear mother Rose had passed peacefully in the night due to natural causes. I was glad that we were there with you so that we could comfort each other during that difficult time. Again, we find ourselves grieving, but this time it is for you. I wish I would have been there in Panama to comfort you while you were suffering from this most devastating depression. You never lost your appetite for life, but you did lose your way, and I wish that I could have helped you find it. This time, no least though, George, we are not ready. We are not ready to live without your love, your caring ways, your sense of humor, witty banter, and of course, your hearty laughter. I always told you that you give the best hugs. They were the kind that let you know that you were deeply missed and deeply loved. I'm glad you gave those deep air hugs, George, as they will now have to last us for a lifetime. We love you, George. Rest in peace, dear brother.
Hello all. Some of you I'm Jen. Thank you all for coming or participating. Although today we meet with the heavy. When I was 6 years old, George was 11 years old, 17. As a typical child at that age, I would play with my friends with toy dinosaurs and GI Joes in the backyard. I love those GI Joes. Okay. As a child, growing up in the Bronx in the late 60s, our neighborhood was primarily Irish and Italian. We really did not know anyone different than us. Unfortunately, the N word and the SB word were used in everyday conversation without a thought by friends and neighbors. We kind of had to consciously fight off becoming racist by osmosis. As you see, I might have failed at that. Fortunately, that atmosphere was not present in our home. George was tossing me up in the air. On this occasion, he lost his grip, and my leg landed with a thud in the hard rubber below. I hysterically ran up 2 flights of stairs, crying all the way. I must have done so in shock because at the emergency room, I was found to have a broken leg. George was devastated with guilt and shock. He felt so bad. He went out and bought me a present. When I opened the present, however, I was visibly disappointed, surprised, and annoyed. I had not thought about it, but I guess I subconsciously thought that all my GI Joes must be Irish and Italian like the people I knew. George had done the unthinkable. What he had done was buy me a black GI Joe, complete with a short black afro. This did not fit into my 6-year-old mini racist mindset. It was quite unbelievable, and my whole family broke out in laughter at my reaction. How could he do such a thing? Over time, though, I got used to my African-American GI Joe. It was actually pretty cool. Slowly but surely, he would become an important member of my troops sent on missions, turning over rocks, looking for beetles. As being different than all the others, he actually became my favorite GI Joe. In later years, though, I realized what George did. He was quietly and subtly teaching me something. He knew that neighborhood. He was clever, but in the process, also tried to teach me a lesson as well. The lesson was about inclusiveness and loving all people. George was quote unquote woke 50 years before there was even a word for it. Shortly after that time, George would begin his exploits around the world. He went to Cornell University in upstate New York for his bachelor's degree. He completed his education spending time in Oregon, Boulder, Colorado, New Zealand, Washington, D.C., and eventually settling down in Panama City, Panama, as you all know. In his pursuits, he would travel the world. He visited 48 of the 50 states and traveled to dozens of countries. His destinations included Madagascar, South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, Gabon, Kenya, Mexico, Argentina, Costa Rica, and many, many others. He absorbed many cultures and met people of all nationalities and identities. He was fluent in Spanish and combed virtually every inch of his newly adopted home, Panama. George did not identify as being a religious person. He stated that he was, quote unquote, a scientist. I believe, however, that his presence, his demeanor, his attitude, and the ways in which he used his time on earth was profoundly what some people might see as quite spiritual. He loved the planet, loved its people, he was truly absorbed in its diversity and biodiversity. He lived and breathed exploring, performing studies and examinations of the plants, environments, animals, and especially birds of the earth. He was as comfortable with dignitaries and celebrities, such as when he gave Jane Goodall a tour of the Biomuseum, as he was speaking with the children of the gentle Kuna Indians of the Sandblast Islands in Panama. This connection with the natural earth means that it will always be with us in the air and the soil. Speaking of the spiritual aura that surrounded George, I have two experiences that deeply impressed me and felt almost otherworldly, as it would directly relate to my spending time with him. In 1980, right after graduating high school, many of my family members visited George in Boulder, Colorado. George was living in a little house with his girlfriend Elaine and 2 or 3 of his friends. My mother and my Aunt Mary joining us meant that there had to be space for 7 adults in the house. After that, there was no more room for myself, my brother Bill, and my cousin Mary Jo to sleep. So what did our responsible adult parents have us do? Well, sleep in the backyard with a bunch of wild animals, of course. Actually, it was quite amazing. They set us up with tents, bedding, and snacks. We were overjoyed and were literally happy campers. What made it awe-inspiring, though, was the location. Boulder, Colorado was in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. We had one of the most beautiful mountain ranges in the world behind us, enjoying the sounds of the crickets and birds and the smells of the grass and wildflowers. It was amazing. What made it extra amazing for me, though, was the music that I bought on my giant silver boombox. I bought Neil Young's Rust Never Sleeps. My, hey, hey, rock and roll here to stay. It's better to burn out than to fade away. My, hey, hey. Nothing has a cherry on top to a camping experience where wild animals that shriek in the dark might lurk behind us than listening to a singer who sounded like a wild animal that might shriek in the dark lurking behind us. I would not have had this incredible experience were it not for George. The other experience was like a backstage pass to another world. On my first trip to Panama with George, I took Rosie, my mom. We visited the Sandblast Islands. The Kuna Indians live primarily on this amazing array of 365 tiny islands called the Sandblast Islands in the Caribbean Sea above the mainland in Panama. George had visited Sandblast so many times, he got to know many of the Kuna. On several occasions, the Kuna run small, rustic hotels. We stayed in the Hotel Anai, which was built on stilts above the green Caribbean water with no glass in the open windows. We ate lobster nightly, cooked by our guide, a couple of hours before serving it to us. Our guide / hotel manager happened to be an elder in the group of Kuna who lived on the island. He knew George. One night, he invited us to a gathering spot amongst the many small huts away from the hotel. That night, they had a religious ceremony where the whole village sang songs in the Kuna language beneath the sky of what seemed like a million stars with the gentle Caribbean winds blowing in front of the palm trees above. The Indians sang beautifully like a magical choir. It sang so sweetly it made you cry. This is not like a tourist experience. It felt like we were respected, invited guests who were allowed to be present at this important religious ceremony. But both my mom and I were blown away. It was ethereal. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It would not have happened without George. It was not a once-in-a-lifetime experience for him. He had these experiences all the time. Everyone who knew George knew of his brilliant mind. From an early age, George had an interest in biology. Growing up, I remember the display of amphibian and reptile specimens kept in jars and formaldehyde, which George had caught during our vacations at Hunters Lake, New York. You might even dissect the locally found crickets. No, it wasn't creepy at all. George would even take trips with my Aunt Nanny to the Museum of Natural History downtown. He was such a frequent visitor, the staff would sometimes let him into the back rooms. George also was on the game show Jeopardy while he was in his early 20s, in the early 70s. My brother Bill and I would gladly pull out of the classrooms so that we could watch it on TV in a separate room. I also remember George scoring very high on the statewide test and coming in second, I believe. George loved family. He loved the holidays. He would visit New York at least 3 times a year: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, and at least one other time, usually during the summer. At Thanksgiving, his jobs were preparing the shrimp cocktail, baking the mashed potatoes, and carving the turkey. At Christmas, he was sure to corral available volunteers to join him in the Christmas count affairs in the city. This count was always done in Pelham Bay Park. Both years with the puppy hat and the pins of pop balloons. If there was a family event, he would always be there. We snuck him in twice to surprise my mom on her 70th and 80th birthdays. Of course, when he first came to New York, he had to go to 3 or 4 young friends. He was always gracious. He would always meticulously fill out the profile. George would look at history like he knew the birds of prey. Well, I've loved everybody. In recent years, for Wicked, Jersey Boys, and the Book of Mormon, and he enjoyed them all immensely. George hosted many of the family in Canada.
He's not gonna be happy, should we do those, Frida? No, not now. Okay. Too much, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Many visited the Bayou Museum, which he worked on for years. The Mirror Floors and Gamboa Rocks, the Stry Observation Tower, and of course the Sandglass Islands. I was lucky enough to fly to the heat and visit the coffee country, stay at the Treetop Hotel in Los Gonzales, and visit the Hotel Panamanta in Boquete with my mom. All of the travels were narrated with the amazing and fascinating deep detail that was George's trademark. George was our main family historian. He tracked our last name to Switzerland and even discovered a castle that was turned into a hotel by some native Angers in St. Gallen, Switzerland. George wrote detailed reports of our family tree lines going back to the mid-19th century. He wrote an extensive account of our Civil War ancestor, Patrick Coleman. The report combined what he knew of Patrick Coleman, blended seamlessly with the historic detail of each troop movement assigned in every battle my great-great-grandfather fought in. When I asked him if he had ever written an account of Dad's service in World War II, he came back 2 weeks later with a comprehensive and riveting account of the World War II service of George T. Angehr, collating my dad's personal service with the historical record of the USS El Dorado, a communication ship in which the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa were coordinated. Both of these accounts are amazing, and I have them up on the table over there. What I remember most about George is his steady, calming nature, his compassion, his gentleness, and his always thoughtful actions. I can't remember any time when George raised his voice in anger or said an unkind word, except for perhaps a deserving politician. I remember his ability to answer any, and I mean any question posed on almost any topic. He knew so much, but was always humble and never boastful. I remember his gentle spirit that radiated love. I remember his compassion for the planet and all its living inhabitants, from jaguars to insects to the bird of paradise. I remember his booming, full-throated laugh and his brilliant, often slightly twisted sense of humor. We will miss you, George, but your presence will always live on and surround us with your kind and brilliant spirit. Thank you.
Anyone else want to come up and speak? And just a reminder to those of you on Zoom, if you'd like to speak, let us know. You could put something in the chat box. We'll get to you. Just give us a wave and we're in front of the meeting. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name's Billy. As Rosie will call me, number 5, George's younger brother. I'd like to thank everybody out there at Smithsonian and all his colleagues for their kind words and condolences, and everybody here. My memories of George growing up were few but very instilled in my head. There was a big discrepancy in age. He was 10 years older than me, so I really didn't see much of him when I was growing up. I'll always remember, though, when he came home from college, he's downstairs watching cartoons, Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny, all those crazy cartoons. A lot of violence. And me and my brother Jim would always have that TV cranked up. God forbid that closet door was open. Everybody knows the closet door, right? We left that open a little bit. God forbid it was open. We all knew who was upstairs. It was the Yeti. It was my brother George. He could hear a pin drop, and we all felt that house shake when he was awoken from his sleep. Everybody knows these 3 words, right? Shut the door. The whole house rumbled. Sometime later, we would pay for waking him up, either by being tickled to death or by being held upside down over the banister staircase. It was all right, George. We knew after that to always keep that closet door shut. I also remember, too, going to the Museum of Natural History. We never needed that tour guide, like Jim said. The only problem was that we would always have to stop at each exhibit. George would read every one of those fact-finding cards. Me being only excited about seeing the dinosaurs, the blue whale, the caveman, saber-tooth tiger, all those other eye-opening displays. So we would have to wait impatiently till George finished. I imagine all this paid off for George with all his accomplishments with the Biomuseum. I'm sure it did. I definitely know it did. I also remember George, too, around the holidays, like all of us. His favorite Thanksgiving and Christmas. He would always come home for those holidays. He loved family and he loved food. He always participated by making shrimp cocktail. I had to be third, among other things. At dinner, everybody knew that George received the first pick, that being the turkey leg. He always got the turkey leg, which maybe that's how he got so involved with the flight migrations of turkey vultures. I don't know, but all things work out. George also loved Christmas time. He loved he'd always have gifts from everywhere he traveled. He would always like to keep the tradition of opening up the gifts after midnight. That was really tough, especially with a few kids. You had to get home to pack their gifts and get them ready for Christmas morning. But we tried. As time went on, it got shorter and shorter, and it all worked out. It was hard for me to keep a conversation with my brother George. His intellect was way far ahead of me, and to keep a conversation with him was pretty tough. But I would just listen in amazement with all his stories, all his accomplishments in Panama, and all the places he traveled, Africa, everywhere he went, New Zealand. He would amaze me with his knowledge, too, of the Angehr family tree, how he could just rattle off names, just unbelievable. He also, like Jim says, my father's World War II record and stuff, he was very knowledgeable with that. Oh, there was one more thing I was able to converse with George, which other family members couldn't because they happened to be Met fans. Me and George clicked when it came to the New York Yankees. Thank God for that. He always gave me something pertaining to the Yankees for Christmas, book, some kind of tidbit about the Yankee. His knowledge for the Yankee also surpassed mine, even though I was a good Yankee fan. He knew everything about the past Yankees. I was knowledgeable about the present, and we would converse about that. Well, George, I just want to let you know how proud I am to call you my brother. You lived life and you followed your dreams. You loved your job. Not many people can say that. I'm going to miss you so much, especially around the holidays. Until we meet again, brother, I love you.
Anyone else here want to say a few words? Come on up, Phil. Yeah, well, I'll fill in a little later, but yeah, please.
This is purely off the cuff. I was jotting down some notes. I don't have family stories to tell, but George and I do go back to high school. Many of you have seen his books over there. I actually didn't browse through a lot of them. I don't know if his artwork is in there. George was an incredible artist. When we had the teen center over at St. Raymond's, one summer, one unforgettable summer, and I think I still have some of these pictures. George drew every character from the Lord of the Rings from their descriptions in the book. It was absolutely amazing. He was just so talented. I still have somewhere in my files, I still have pictures of his flowers that I don't even know where the hell he was. Whoever knew where the hell he was. But he was incredible. One thing I will say, anybody who's ever watched the movie with George knows how much fun that is. That's not supposed to be there. That vegetation is wrong. Those birds aren't there. This is historically wrong. You would have to watch the movie again after you saw it with him because you did not enjoy it. Many people here have talked about how smart George was. We all know how smart George was. The pandemonium, oh geez, I'm saying it wrong. Don't haunt me, pal. His friends in Panama used to say, ask George. Ever play Trivial Pursuit with George? We did. When he didn't agree with the cards, we assumed the cards were wrong. He always won. Now, everybody knows his bird history. I used to tease him all the time. I never went bird watching with him. I thought it was the craziest, stupidest, dumbest thing in the world, but I never said that to him out loud. But he knew it. He knew it. But one time, this was great. Now, Gazer and Lindsay are in the back here. I don't know if you remember this. This is years and years ago. And their daughter's first day with the new mouth. Sorry. Their daughters were very young. We were at dinner, my wife and them. And we were all very proud of George and his accomplishments. We never told him to his face because, to us, he was George from high school. And Gazer is bragging George up to his kids. And he goes, he's like the third leading authority of birds in the world. And his little daughter said, so what? They're birds. Who cares? He goes, but he was number 3. Yeah, but they're birds. Who cares? We didn't win that fight. Everybody's had a Museum of Natural History story. I was with George once, and just to get an idea of the authority he was throughout the world. Again, the dinosaurs, the blue whale. I'm checking out all this stuff. We're at this, I don't know, an Arctic exhibit. I don't know what the heck it was. There's birds, there's water, there's ice. That's what I see. What he sees, he points to the back. He goes, that's not supposed to be there. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? There was a bird in the exhibit that was not supposed to be there. Now, to give you an idea of how important George was, the next day they changed the exhibit. He went and complained to someone. It was absolutely amazing. And somebody was talking about how one of you guys were talking about how he was reading all the information at the museum and, getting everything right. I was with George once in Washington at the zoo. And again, he's reading one of the plaques. That's not right. This animal, and then he starts telling me all about the animals. Then people start flowing around us. It was like George was the tour guide of the zoo. Everybody followed us around the zoo, asking George stories about the different animals. It was amazing. But I don't know. There was so many stories, I'm sure, over 50 years worth, and trying to jot down a few. This was the best I could come up with. But we did meet George once a year. We got together for dinner, and this was the first year we went to dinner without him. I mean, I was grateful that I spoke to him, in November to set up a date for when he was coming in, and he said he might not be coming in, and unfortunately, he didn't. We did have dinner. We did think of him. We had a drink in his honor, and he'll be missed.
Anyone else like to come up or speak from your seats, or
Just wants to say.
anyone on Zoom?
I'd like to talk on this.
Andrea?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna just set you up on a speaker so we can all hear you. Hold on.
all right, thanks.
I think we're good. Angehr, do you want to try it?
Oh, great, thank you. Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to do my PhD on Barrow, Colorado Island, and overlapped with George there. And I see Annette Aiello and Judy Gradwell also here on our Zoom, and we were all there at the same time. And it was a kind of a wonderland for scientists, in the sense that we had a lot of freedom. We had this wonderful jungle to explore. We had boats to go and take around to other islands that were in the Panama Canal. And George was like just a good friend to everyone and a helpful friend. If there was something big that had to be done, everybody would show up to, whatever it was, make some kind of place to hide so you could watch your animals or something like that, or get boats working and stuff like that. So there was really a lot of camaraderie, and he was part of it, and a big part of it. And that's really all I want to say, because having people like that when you're living on an island and you're all together for a long time, it's really great to have somebody with curiosity and ideas, and a lot of ideas for fun. And I really remember him and appreciate him for that. And I
Thank
believe.
Angehr is one of my neighbors in Schenectady, by the way, I'm glad to say. Anyone else?
I'll pipe in. I'm Judy Gradwell. I was part of the gang in the late 70s on BCI, and a lot of fond memories of hanging out with George, especially the day we went through the canal on, you remember the name of the research vessel that picked us up, Andrea? But I still quote George occasionally. After I left BCI, I worked at Smithsonian in DC for many years, and I curated an exhibition on tropical rainforests. And George was hired to be one of the researchers on the project. And at that point, we had to make phone calls all over the world to try to collect pieces that we needed for the exhibition. And I'll never forget George would always say, with a Bronx accent that I cannot possibly imitate, "There's no harm in asking." And so we would just get on the phone, no harm in asking. We would ask anybody for anything. And it was a fantastic strategy. So I still quote him today when people come up to me and they're having a problem with something. There's no harm in asking. So he lives on in that spirit. And I think that he was really fearless about a lot of things, and a lot of a great friend and a lot of fun.
Okay. I would like to say something. Can you hear me? No, not you.
Who's
Can
speaking?
anyone hear me?
We can hear you. Who is speaking?
Annette Aiello.
Okay, thank you. We can hear you.
First, I want to say hello to Andrea and Judy. It's been a long, long time. And Andrea used to cut my hair, for which I am still grateful. Those days were a gift. An incredible gift. And so many of the people who were there then are gone now. And George is among the most important of those people. His knowledge was the main thing that impressed me, but also his sense of humor. He was very funny. And of course, all his green t-shirts with holes. One of the things that I most remember about him. It just seems like another life, like a movie I saw a long time ago. I'm grateful for the time that I had with you all and him.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you.
Anyone else? After George passed, my brother George, Dan, and I knew we had to go to Panama to make arrangements. It was very, very difficult to arrange because we had to have certain paperwork, which took forever, partly because of COVID, and partly just because that's the way things work, red tape. Eventually, although George passed in late November, we made it to Panama at the end of January, beginning of February. We made arrangements through the Fiscalia, the police department there, to recover George's remains, to get the key to his apartment, to arrange for his cremation, and to have his remains shipped back here. So it took us the week. We met many of George's friends, and had a beautiful memorial service for him there with many of his colleagues. One of the things that I found in George's apartment was a quote that he had asked me to write in calligraphy for him back in 1987. I'm not sure where George was in 1987. I know I was in Schenectady, and I had taken a calligraphy course. So I said, sure, I'll write that down. And it was still in his apartment in the little plastic frame that I had put it in. And the quote is from Carlos Castaneda. He's like Don Juan, the Yaqui mystic. And it says, for me, there is only the traveling on the paths that have a heart on every path that may have a heart. There I travel, and the only worthwhile challenge for me is to traverse its full length. And there I travel, looking breathlessly. To me, this sums up George's life, a life of travel, of looking the path of the heart. And he was so gracious in taking us along. From our childhood, walking the swamps of the Bronx, the Bronx Zoo, Westchester Creek, east to Manhattan, to the Museum of Natural History, to Colorado when he was in graduate school. I went to Ithaca to see him when he was at Cornell. And some of us were very lucky to visit him in Canada. And as other people have said, he was such a wonderful guide, and he knew so much. And we all have similar stories to tell. I remember your last time, my wife Laura and I were in the Bio Museo, which he was instrumental in creating, and he was showing us around. And one of the docents happened to come by, and she overheard George explaining this exhibit to us. And she said, "See, you know, you seem to know a lot about this." He says, "Well, I wrote it." And she said, "Oh my God, are you Dr. Angehr?" And of course he beamed, and we beamed too, because we were so proud of him and his knowledge. And she was so glad to meet him in person, because he had actually trained many of the docents or guides of the Bio Museo early on. So we always enjoyed and will always cherish those memories and those journeys. I was cleaning up in my house not too long ago, and I going through some stuff, and you know, you save stuff from your kids for whatever reason. And I came across something that one of my kids had written when he was about 7 years old. And my son Paul wrote this. And it probably was for something in school, because he got a grade on it that said good. My favorite person is my Uncle George, because he went to Panama. There's a little P over the Panama. And he gives us things from Panama. He also went to Madagascar, and there's a little map of Madagascar written over that. George has had so much impact on all of us. So many journeys, so many memories, and such a heart. And I'm so grateful to have had him for a brother. Thanks. Anyone else would want to say something? You can hear elsewhere. You're welcome to.
Rich.
One has to report from 8 to clock out tomorrow.
Oh, Emma? Oh, Emma, why?
Okay. So I heard Rob and Anna. Can you look on the screen, Jim? I can't see everybody. Who was it that wanted to speak?
Rob.
Okay, so Rob, and I think there was someone else. So go ahead, Rob.
Yes, just a few words. I had very fond memories of George. George was always a fixture at the house during the holidays, and he was one of the few that knew a lot of my birth country, and I was always able to discuss many issues with him over the time that we spent together. I was lucky to visit George in Panama, and I learned a lot from that trip. George had the ability to make any subject interesting, and he was a great role model, brother-in-law, and friend. He will be missed, and I just want to rest in peace, George. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Was there someone else on Zoom? Okay, anyone else here? So we're going to be here for a little while yet, mingling. You're welcome to, we'll keep the Zoom meeting open for anyone who may be joining us late. We kept the meeting, anyone can join this meeting at any time, so I'm not going to close the meeting for now. So if anybody does join us and wants to join in remembering George, feel free. We'll be here for a while yet, and I just want to thank you all for being part of this and for remembering George with us. Thank you. Yeah, my sister Laura wants to say something. And I don't know if we want to play that song now while people are here after Laura speaks, or we could do that too. All right. So we'll have a song in memory of George as well.
I just wanted to say something in reference to what Phil said about him in the movies. You have not lived until you've seen George watch 90 Day Fiance.
Oh, where is it? Huh? 3%. Yeah. Is there a stand for it? So this is a traditional song in Irish tradition. It's a song. So you might have too much.
In good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that e'er I've had, they are sorry for my going away. And all the sweethearts that e'er I've had, they would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not. I'll gently rise and I'll softly fall. Good night and joy be with you all. If I had money enough to spend and leisure time to sit a while, there is a fair maid in this town that sorely has my heart beguiled. Her rosy cheeks and ruby lips, I own she has my heart involved. So fair to me their parting glance. Good night and joy be with you all. My dearest dear, the time draws near when here no longer can I stay. There is not a comrade I leave behind, but is grieving for my going away. But since it has so ordered me, I have time to rise and time to fall. Until to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all.